So welcome. My name is Jan Lehman. I'm the owner of CTC Productivity. And normally with us, we have Nancy Krushke, but Nancy's off today. But Arnie Howes is with us. Arnie is our business process improvement guru and Microsoft 365 guru. And today's session actually was supposed to be done by Arnie, but Arnie had a really bad vacation. Not only did it rain the entire time, but he got COVID. So he is actually quarantining, and his voice is very harsh. And so he's on the call with us, but we'll be chiming in periodically when I miss something I'm supposed to be saying. So anyway, glad you're here, Arnie. So for those of you that are new to our webinar series, we've been doing this for, we think, like 2 years now. We've been doing it since the pandemic started. And the whole purpose was we were realizing companies didn't understand the power of Microsoft 365. And so we started having these free sessions just to make people aware of the software that they already are paying for, but not leveraging. So the session that we're actually doing today is it's part 2 of a 3-part series on Microsoft Teams adoption. And I'll do a recap in a minute on what we did in part 1, but today's focus is really around the importance of customizing the training environment before you do end user training to help with adoption. So I'm going to enter into chat some links for you. And if you want to see past recordings, there's a link out there if you want to sign up for next month's session, and I'll tell you what that's going to be. Or if you want to follow us on YouTube, and I think sign up for our newsletter. And my new book is actually coming out this winter. So if you're interested in that, you might want to sign up for the newsletter and check the box that you're interested in the book. So we'll make you aware when it's been printed. So our session next month is going to be Arnie. Hopefully he's going to be back up, and he's going to be doing part 3 of the Microsoft adoption strategy. And that particular one next month is going to be around the importance of companies creating what we call rules of the road or rules of engagement. It's really saying this is exactly how this particular company is going to customize and use 365, because it is a very customizable system. So that's going to be our session next month. So before we dive into the actual content, I'm just going to hit on a couple quick slides to tell you a little bit more about why we started this program. So we were hearing from a lot of our customers that they were struggling with the issues you see on the page. So issues with communication, collaboration, and we were realizing that Microsoft 365 really addresses a lot of those issues. So that's why we said we need to start sharing what we know. And especially as we moved into more of a hybrid work model, a remote work model, getting on cloud-based technology is super important for streamlining the way you work, no matter what location you're in. So that's why we came together. We love Microsoft Teams. These are statistics for you from Forrester about the value of it. My favorite is the one that says almost a 19% reduction in meetings when you learn how to use Microsoft Teams effectively. And I'm happy to report we're doing some of our own case studies, and soon we'll start bringing in some of our own examples of what we've done for our customers. So let's start part 2 of the series. I'm pausing because we break it out on YouTube. So we started a 3-part series, and this is part 2 of that program, and it's around how to do Microsoft 365 adoption. I'm going to do a quick recap about part 1 that Arnie did for us last month. So something that's important to know, and that particular session was all around strategy and setting expectations. And so one of the key points that Arnie brought up last month was understanding that this is really a leadership initiative. It is not a training initiative. It's not an IT initiative. It's really important that leaders are involved in driving the projects. Whenever we're working with clients, we always have an executive sponsor that's on there that's well aware of what we're doing, what the strategies are, the business strategies we're trying to address. The second important point last month was that it must be a business-driven project, not tech-driven. So even though we kind of come into these webinars often talking about OneNote and the power of OneNote, you would never kick off a Microsoft 365 initiative because you found a fancy new tool. It's always got to be driven from the fact that here's a business issue we're running into, how do we solve it? So that's the way you want to consider going into these sort of projects. We're also big advocates of making sure they're happy adoptions and not forced adoptions. And today's topic is definitely going to be very much about that. How do you make an end user happy in the training so they're super excited? And then last, they want to make sure that participation in using the 365 Teams environment is mandatory, not optional. Because if you have one person off still using email, instead of using the Teams post feature within 365, it's not going to work. It's like a, one broken chink in the chain. It just doesn't work. So it's important that you do it that way. And I forgot to mention, I'm going to go through and do kind of a deep dive on our topic right now, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. Feel free, though, as we go along, if you have questions or thoughts and you want to enter into the chat, that would be great. Arnie may chime in as well, but I'm going to kind of hit the topic first, and then we'll open it up for conversation. So that's how we structure our webinars. So getting into this particular part 2, we're talking about the importance of customizing an end user environment before you do training. There's really 2 important criteria that you want to consider, that you want to hit on when you're creating your environment. One is you want to make sure that you're setting up the environment so that the end users know what's in it for them. So they need to be sold, they need to be convinced that this is worth my time to sit through this training and learn about the particular tools. And then the second one is you want to be solving an obvious business problem for them as well. So if you can help them see how something that's been a headache for them constantly on the way they do something within the business is going to be solved by the technology, they're going to be more likely to buy into that. And so the customization is really what's going to drive their excitement and their acceptance of this move forward. So if you're not customizing the team environment and you just have people come out to a generic team, let's say you create a team within 365, and Arnie cutely named this our really bad team. So if you're just creating like a super simple team and you're not filling all this information in and you're having an end user training session, they're not going to be excited. They're not going to be able to connect the dots of what did I do over here and how do I transfer it over? And so that's what we're going to be showing you. Typically what we recommend for companies, actually always what we recommend for companies, is you'd want to pilot the software, figure out how you're going to use it, how things are going to be structured, and then you would do end user training. And so you're going to be in a good position to be able to do what we're defining here because your pilot group is going to help kind of set the stage. Arnie, am I missing anything so far?
There I go. Had trouble hitting the unmute button, but no, yeah, my main point with this slide was that nobody can get excited about this because there's just nothing there that pertains to my job if I'm sitting in a training class.
Perfect. Thanks, Arnie. So this would be a better example of how you want to set up the environment before you do end user training. And we're going to walk through the slide in different fields. And we know that everybody on the call is at a different point in their training on 365. So if we're saying terms that you've never heard of, again, enter that into chat. We can give you definitions. But ultimately, this is what you'd want the end user environment to look like so that they can start to connect the dots from their old world to their new world. So how do you customize the training? So first off, you're going to want to create a team for every work group. And so in most companies, you're going to have a team for the executive team. You'll have a team for the department. You may have a Microsoft team for a project. It depends really on how many projects you have, how long the projects run. So that one can vary. But ultimately, you're creating like what we call a communication and collaboration hub for each team of people that work together. And within that team are what Microsoft calls them channels. And really what the channels are is they match your processes. So what are some of the processes that that team is responsible for? And again, we'll give you some examples in a second. And then also within that team environment is you have resource tabs that are connected to those channels. And those contain really rich information that really are part of making this a valuable solution for those end users. And then you always want to seed the information in there with information they recognize. And in particular, when we do posts, so you want to look at like how do you move an email that you currently have into the Teams environment so they can see the difference between what it might look like in email and what it might look like in the post environment. And again, I'm going to go through all these a few more times so you can grasp them. So going back to the example of what your customized environment may look like before end user training, you're going to have set up channels beforehand that are channels that they're familiar with. So again, a channel is really a process. So this is obviously a company. They've got EOS as a process. So it's an EOS entrepreneurial operating system. If you're not familiar with that, they follow EOS. So that's a process within the organization. So that might be a channel. In this particular case, Arnie lives on a farm. And so he has created this team for his farm, for his property. And he has created a channel called Wildlife Habitat. And so that's actually the channel that we're currently sitting in and we're going to be playing with here. Then at the top, this is where the tabs are that we talked about. And so these are really important resources that everybody on this team needs to access, that they need to, that they're in and out of. And again, if you set the tabs up properly, and users are super excited because they don't have to go to 20 different places to find things, they can actually get to everything they need while they're doing the work on that particular team. And these tabs can include non-Microsoft 365 applications. So often we're telling our clients they should be bringing in like their CRM tools or their ERP tools, if you know those terms, just outside software. So if there is a URL for that software, it can be brought into the Microsoft Teams environment. But the goal is to really bring all those things in together again, so they're not bouncing around. And then right now we are in the Freedom Farm team. We are in the Wildlife Habitat channel. And up at the tabs part, we're in posts. And so post, if you're not familiar with this concept, it is the written communication tool within Teams that will replace email. It is the meatier part of the conversation. Many folks have experimented with chat. The chat really should be like a one-on-one conversation just to say, hey, I'm running late, or can you make it to the meeting? But the meatier conversations that you're having within your companies absolutely should be done in the post area, so that this stays on and everybody who comes on board to the team years after has access to this content and all of that. So you'd want to seed this particular post area before you do customized training to show examples of conversations that historically happened in email. Again, the intention is it looks familiar. I understand this. It's not quite so foreign, and they can start to connect the dots on what a post might be versus a channel as they see it in their own terminology.
Jan, if I could.
Yeah, please.
Can you hear me? If you could back up one slide.
Got it.
Okay, and another huge selling point to the end users during the training, and it's really a selling point to management, is if the conversations, the meatier conversations around subject matter in these process areas is conducted in the posts, every single one of these posts become keyword searchable in that search bar at the top. So you are building an incredible, let this person in here.
I got it, Arnie.
I'm multitasking. You are building an incredible knowledge base. And as a manager, this is awesome in many ways, but especially in this day and age, as people seem to be leaving companies, it's hard to replace them. You bring new employees in, they have access to look through all of those meaty conversations, even if they just joined the company today. So valuable succession planning tool.
Yeah, good point, Arnie. Thank you. Glad we didn't miss that one. So now I'm going to circle back and keep diving a little bit deeper into each of these sections on that sort of Teams interface. So channels, a good way to think of channels are super folders. And I tell you, this took me a long time for Arnie and Nancy to help me understand this. But they're really super folders, and they contain much more than files. Again, they contain all of the stuff we've been talking about for that particular process. So one thing to realize that a lot of companies don't understand is when you create a team, so let's say we create a team for the executive team, you're actually creating a SharePoint site just for that executive team. And all of these pieces and parts sit within that particular team. So, so there's super folders that contain a lot of great information. Again, you want your channels to match processes within your organization. So when you're working on a process, you would go to that particular process in the channel. And these channels often are equivalent to when if your data is still over on the network drive, it's often equivalent to that folder structure. And in fact, that's where we start when we work with companies and we're helping get them on 365 and set them up properly, is we really start looking at the data on the network drive and how will that migrate over, because that will give you some insight as to what your team structure should look like, your permission within teams, what the folder structure will look like, et cetera. So I hope that helps you kind of grasp what the channels look like. Within the tabs area at the top think of it really as a one-stop shop for, again, end users. And I in particular think this is valuable for a couple of reasons right now. So organization really is a founding principle of productivity. If you're organizing your time, you're organizing your data, you're going to be more productive. And so the idea of pulling in everything that you would need when you're working on that team just makes perfect sense. And that's exactly what Microsoft has done here by pulling in these tabs. In addition, what I like is in this world where everybody gets so easily distracted, it's so much better to have people in here and staying focused on this particular team and the activities versus going over to email where there's 20 different things going on and your mind could get scattered and you can work on the wrong thing. This really helps you stay focused within, the task at hand. So examples, again, of what you might have for tabs, you might pull in your planner, which contains like your tasks for a particular project. Maybe you can pull in other websites. Procedures would be a great thing. What are the procedures for how we do wildlife habitat? If I need a refresher, it's right here. There's lots of examples, SharePoint lists, dashboards, metrics, everything that person might need. So Arnie, that is all I had for the session. What did I miss?
I think you did great, Jan.
Yay, awesome.
And thanks so much for filling in for me. It just, or I was dreading doing this because of my voice and congestion. So I'm so thankful you could step up and you did a great job. Thanks.
Oh, you rock. Yeah, awesome. No, I'm happy to do it. So, okay, let me wrap up and then we're going to open up for Q&A. And so again, we don't know where all of you are in the learning curve of 365. So if some of these terms are like, what in the heck is she talking about? What's a post? What's a whatever? Please don't be afraid to ask that question. We have people that have no idea what 365 is. And then we have people all the way at the other end where they're almost on full adoption. So please ask those questions. But let me wrap up first and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So what's happening is people are finding our webinars out on YouTube, and they're assuming that's all we do is 365. So I just thought I'd give a little recap about what CTC Productivity does. So for sure, we are becoming known as a company that thoroughly understands how to roll out 365. Again, our focus is to do it to solve business processes and kinks in the system. So that's a big area of our consulting work that we do. But in addition to that, I do coaching. Personally, my job on the team is to do executive coaching. Typically what happens is when I'm coaching an executive leader, and then often I'm coaching all the people on the leadership team, it's very obvious to see where there is waste, where there are challenges, and where they need to be leveraging 365. So that's a fairly typical scenario of how we work together. Nancy and I both do a ton of training, keynote speaking, all of that. And these are a lot of the topics we touch on. The hot topics this year are project management for everyday leaders. Everybody needs to really understand those concepts and principles and how to run an effective meeting. Those have been our two hot topics. Plus Nancy is doing a ton of Microsoft technical training for various companies. And so just a reminder again that next month, and I'll enter these links in again into the chat, let me just send that. So next month will be part 3 of our Microsoft Teams adoption strategy. And again, you can go back and look at past recordings on our website. You can see part 1, part 2. You can see the last 2 years of webinars. There's lots of great content out there. And again, to sign up for our newsletter, we would encourage you. But next month is going to be on rules of the road or rules of engagement and how to establish that for your company. And on that note, we will open it up for Q&A if there's any questions, and no worries if they're not. But feel free to unmute yourself or put your camera on or whatever you want to do, or you enter it in chat, whatever is most comfortable for you. Did this make sense? How about a little comment in the chat? Did the what we explained made sense? Does it resonate? Dana, what do you think? I know you'll give me honest scoop.
Yeah, it totally makes sense to me. I'm in Teams all the time. I actually use chat way more than I use the Teams feature, but what you're saying actually makes sense in terms of making it searchable and using the Teams portion more than the chat. So that makes sense. My question, and maybe you can address this maybe in a future webinar, but my biggest issue with Teams is inviting in non-employee, like people who are not in my team, to join a team or a chat, or if I have customers that they have their own teams and I need access to their teams because we're sharing information for a particular project or something, and I need access to their files, which is in their teams or something, so they have to give me access. It's very difficult to jump from one team to another team when you're not employees of the same company. So any tips or tricks to help with that?
Yeah, so Dana, thank you. And actually Microsoft recognizes that's an issue to be jumping around. And so we've got to be close at this point, if it's not out yet, that they're making that easier. So Arnie, I don't know if you're abreast of where we stand on that, but I know that there was a release coming out that would make it easier to jump from, they call them tenants. So like I have my own tenant and your customer would have their tenant. So to be able to jump from tenant to tenant. So I'll let Arnie, do you know if that's out yet?
It's been kind of a bumpy rollout for Microsoft, but Dana, you're exactly right. It's actually not real hard to jump from tenant to tenant, but it is definitely a bother. And a lot of people do struggle with it.
Well, and you can't be in two teams at the same time, right? Two different company teams at the same time, unless like what I do is I have it open in separate browsers because I need to be in my teams and I need to be in my clients' teams.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. If you are on during a virtual Teams meeting, exactly right. You cannot leave the tenant. I found that out the hard way. So don't sign out of your tenant while you're in a meeting or you're in trouble.
Right.
But yes, they do have the shared channels coming. They keep saying that. I keep looking for it. I've not had it available, but when it gets here, it's going to be awesome because nobody has to switch tenants to, you can invite people to just certain channels within your team.
Right.
It's not yet available in my tenant, and I keep looking in clients' tenants. I have yet to find it, but.
Do you think it's coming yet sometime this year?
I think so. I had thought it was coming soon. As soon as it's out, we will be doing a webinar on it.
Okay, that would
probably the number one issue. Yeah, keep an eye out, sign up for our newsletter, Dana, and you can just see. But as soon as it's out, we're going to be doing it because this is probably the most consistent complaint we've been getting from clients is the need for that. The only other thing I'll add to the conversation is often what we're finding is companies don't know how to set up the infrastructure properly at the beginning. So, they don't realize if you plan to be collaborating with one of your customers, you really should set up a team environment for that collaboration. So it's these foundational pieces that often aren't set up properly, and it makes it really frustrating for an end user. So
yeah, that will be very momentous that's redundant. It will be momentous when it happens because, we work with a lot of engineering firms who, during project management, they are sending so many files back and forth, and it just would be much simpler to have them in the exact same team, the same channels, and put an end to those large emails going back and forth. So we're all anxiously awaiting for it.
Good. Well, I'm really glad to hear that it's coming because that's exciting news for me. So thank you.
Dana, it's interesting. I've noticed it's definitely companies like yours and mine where we're consultants, we're in a number of different tenants with customers and versus somebody who works in a corporation and they're typically just in that team. So it makes sense that would be a struggle for you. Great question. Any other questions, Dana, or anybody else?
Not for me. I thought it was great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So is today the first day you heard the word post, Dana? Is that?
No.
No. Okay. Perfect. Any other questions? Anything with 365. It doesn't necessarily have to be about this particular topic today. Or if you have suggestions and enter it into chat if you want to future topics, we're happy to, we're always looking for what do people want to hear about. So
I have one parting thought that I always like to say when it comes to Teams or SharePoint is you want to make it so useful that you cannot keep them away from it. And if you can do that before the training with this customization of Teams, you don't have to force anyone to adopt it, because you won't be able to keep them away from it if you do a good job.
Yeah, it's a good point, Arnie. We see the difference between how our clients are rolling this out, and it's not that hard to get them excited.
Maybe you guys could touch base a little bit. Like I have one client that really struggles with the files system in SharePoint and doesn't really understand how Teams and SharePoint are connected. So maybe you could just speak to that a little bit so I could help explain it to her.
Well, most people don't realize, but Teams actually is SharePoint. It is just a highly customized SharePoint site. And it is kind of, you have to get into it in a backhanded way. Click on the Files tab in Teams and then open in SharePoint, and then boom, you're inside the actual SharePoint site itself that can be built out and such. So when you see the channels in a team, those channels are actually simply folders in the SharePoint document library behind the scenes.
So if you have a client, like my client, she works in, she's putting stuff in the files in SharePoint, but she's not using Teams. I can't get her to use Teams yet. But I think if she could understand, and maybe you can show it or give an example of something that if she's already put the files in SharePoint, she can access them from Teams. She doesn't have to jump back and forth, right?
Well, Arnie, I'll make a comment there and then you correct me.
Okay.
This is one of the mistakes that we see a lot of companies making. And often if their IT provider doesn't really understand 365, is often they're taking all the data on a network drive and just moving it over into one SharePoint site. And that is not what you want to do. You really want to, again, understand what those team structures look like and move those files on that particular SharePoint site. So it might have to do with how they're constructing. I don't know, Dana, if that hits the mark, but often they're putting it out on a general SharePoint site and then they're sharing it with different people. It's better to define the team structure, move the data to the right place. All those people have access and you don't even have to share.
Yes, Dana, okay. The files are certainly available to her right now through Teams. But if she started putting the files in SharePoint rather than in the Teams Files tab, while they are available, they're not obvious. So she did, by doing it in that order, she did make things more complicated. And there would just have to be some rearrangement made so that all those files would be instantly visible in Teams rather than, like I said, having to go through the back door by clicking the Files tab and then open in SharePoint.
Okay. That's probably why she's confused and didn't get it. So, all right, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just a little out of order and it just have to be rearranged if she were to begin using Teams as her main entryway into the files.
Okay. Also, not everybody has a very big IT department that they can call on at any time. So depends on the size of the company, right? So
yeah, 100%. Yep. Perfect. Dana, thank you for asking questions. Helpful. Anybody else have a question? You're welcome to unmute or enter into chat. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and sign off, but we're happy to answer questions. All right, I think we'll go ahead and sign off. So thanks so much for everybody. Please join us next month for part 3. If you do like the webinar series, if you please tell friends and colleagues, we would love it. And hopefully we'll see you next month. Thanks so much.